All right, this morning some buzz about a moment during the sit-down between Vice President Harris and Oprah Winfrey. Kamala Harris spoke about being a gun owner and exactly what she would do with that gun if someone broke into her home.
I'm a gun owner. Tim Walz is a gun.
I did not know that.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear that. I hear that.
Probably should not have said that.
But
my staff will deal with that later.
All right, with us now, CNN political analyst, Washington bureau chief for the Boston Globe, the paper of record, Jackie Kucinich, and press advisor to former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, Maura Gillespie. Jackie, you really think the staff's going to try to clean that up? Or what is Vice President Harris doing there in terms of her discussion about gun ownership?
Well, I think just politically, you're not really used to hearing Democratic politicians and a presidential contender talk about guns that flippantly, but they are still talking about firearm ownership. They're talking about the difference between that and some of the policies that she's advocating. So it certainly was a moment there. They're still, on message in a lot of ways. Will they try to clean it up? We'll have to see if there's any backlash, but it doesn't seem to be headed in that direction quite yet.
No, I mean, the fact that she had brought up she was a gun owner before, it seems to be exactly the kind of message that probably she wanted to send there. Maura, the very fact of this sort of online streaming show with Oprah Winfrey. I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I covered campaigns when there were press conferences and rallies. How effective do you think this type of event is in this day and age?
At this day and age, to think that any one platform or any one source of media or news is, that's just not where we're at right now. The technology, the way people get their information these days, it really does run the gamut of, social media on different platforms, but also through podcasts, through streaming services, through cable TV. You're trying to meet people where they are, and where people are all over the place. And so it's important to try and utilize each of these different mediums. But I just want to comment on what you said before. I think what's interesting about her comment about gun ownership is that roles reverse. If a Republican was up on stage with Oprah Winfrey or somebody else saying, if somebody comes into my house, I would shoot them, or breaks into my house, I would shoot them. This would be a huge story against a Republican who would say that. And I'm not saying that it's, it's not right to do that. You have every right to defend yourself and your home. But I just think it's interesting how it's considered a flippant remark and it was met with laughter. Whereas I think if a Republican said that, we'd all be up, freaking out about it. So, this is where Republicans are going to get frustrated. I don't know that appeals to them as much as maybe she thinks it would.
That is an interesting point. I want to play some sound from Donald Trump. He was speaking to Jewish groups, I think trying to win their votes, but suggesting that it would be partly Jews' fault if he lost. Listen.
With all I have done for Israel, I received only 24% of the Jewish vote. Now think of this. I really haven't been treated very well, but that's the story of my life. I'm not going to call this as a prediction, but in my opinion, the Jewish people would have a lot to do with a loss if I'm at 40%. If I'm at 4, think of it, that means 60% are voting for Kamala, who in particular is a bad Democrat. The Democrats are bad to Israel.
All right, Jackie, I do realize that among the three of us, I may be the one related to the most Jews, but how do you think the blame the Jews strategy will work in terms of convincing Jews to vote for him?
I doubt that was in the teleprompter, John. They have been struggling this entire campaign to keep the president on message. This is not on message. This actually will likely hurt him. But anytime he's not talking about immigration, anytime he's not about the economy, you can hear, Republicans putting their heads in their hands, because this is not the direction that they would want him to go. I feel.
In the meantime, so much porn, so little time. Let's talk about Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, Mark Robinson. Maura, the K-File reporting, there was no other way.
That's a segue.
So it is what it is. And the things that K-File reports that Mark Robinson posted on that website are stunning and they are shocking. The political impact, really not so much on his race in North Carolina, where he seems to be pretty healthily behind, but on the presidential election in that swing state. What impacts do you see?
people don't want to show up and vote, because for people who are traditional Republicans, they vote down ballot and just click the box. They're not going to necessarily want to have their name associated with having voted for a Mark Robinson by going down ballot like that. So they may not show up at all. And that's a real problem for Donald Trump, especially in a state where it's looking like it could be, a Harris win, so he is going to be there on Saturday, and I don't know how he does it to convince the voters to come out just for him, but that's going to be a problem. And I think that putting it lightly is the fact that Donald Trump endorsed him, knowing that he had said that women who are advocates for birth control are witches, that women shouldn't have the vote, and amongst other heinous things that he has said. He then, after saying all that, was then endorsed by Donald Trump. And so this is another example of Donald Trump causing the Republican Party major losses.
Reverse coattails, Jackie, is that something that we believe in? Didn't used to.
It's certainly possible here. I mean, Mark Robinson wasn't ahead before this came out, and he surely, has said a litany of terrible things already. But in North Carolina does have a history of voting cross ballot, voting one way, another, and for a different office another way. That said, this could be such a drag. It really could hurt Trump in a state where it really is on the bubble. You could go either way.
All right, Jackie Kucinich, Maura Gillespie, thank you for putting up with me, both of you. I really appreciate it. Kate?